One of the real treats for me at the Centre Court MBA Festival, of course, with all of these panels with insights and expertise around admissions and the very many dimensions of the MBA programs, is the chance for John and I to sit down with the voices and the vision of the schools and deans who themselves in how they navigate their own leadership challenges. And of course, that's the theme for this Centre Court MBA Festival. I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Nicola Kleyn. Nicola is the Dean of Executive Education, including the MBA programs at the Rotterdam School of Management, Erasmus University, or RSM, as we managed to get out much more quickly. Nicola, it's lovely to see you again. I hope that you're well.
I'm doing fantastically, Matt, and what a pleasure to be here with you today. So thank you very much for the opportunity to have a quick informal chat and catch up.
Right. We've had the chance in the past, and of course with colleagues, including Ansgar, talking about this mission statement at RSM and being a force for positive change, which is something that really resonates with you. And I think as we think of this theme of responsible leadership within this Centre Court Festival, it's something that really struck you when you joined RSM.
It did indeed. You know, I applied to RSM after I'd made a decision to step down or not to apply for a second term in my previous institution in South Africa. And one of the things that I'm absolutely passionate about is impact. I think coming from South Africa, it's shaped me deeply. I wasn't actually going to apply for a role, and I ran into Ansgar at a conference and started understanding a bit more about RSM. And I can really say that this question of what is force for positive change mean hooked me, got me in, perhaps against their better judgment, because I'm constantly banging on in our executive board meetings around what does this really mean and how do we evolve it? Because it's one thing to have a really catchy tagline, but it's another thing to constantly reflect on it and live it.
Yeah, and so I suppose as we think about the MBA program, even in your research, you've thought about sort of the opportunity, the responsibility of business schools to train future leaders. So within the MBA program at RSM, how much emphasis does the program place on that aspect of leadership development?
It's absolutely critical. I mean, ours is a lived mission. And I think before one even gets into the design of a program, any program is going to be a manifestation of the school. So if a program is going to be authentic, you can't have a school that professes one thing and does a program on something else. You know, we were actually having this conversation yesterday. Should we, for example, ever talk about tax evasion? Do we have a responsibility to teach this versus tax avoidance? And of course, we do bring it up, but this question of the program being a manifestation of the school is very important. And of course, the attitudes of the faculty who ultimately work together and collaborate to design the program. So the question of ethics and the question of responsibility is really ingrained in the MBA program. I have come across MBA programs in my life where I sometimes feel like ethics and responsible leadership is a bolt-on. You take a standardized curriculum that in the past, and certainly when I studied my MBA many years ago, there was a singular shareholder focus. And then over time, I think we bolted on corporate social responsibility. And so this flip from it being something that is peripheral to actually being central, to thinking about impact that multiple levels need to think about. And when I say that, I mean the individual impact, that student, and what their life's journey is going to be, and the influence that they will be able to have, right through to an understanding of the world systemically, and to being able to diagnose and solve for the changes that not only we're affecting personally, but our organizations, our industries, our countries, to ultimately build a world that's going to be better for our grandchildren or worse for our grandchildren.
Right. You've reminded me, I guess, if we go back 20 years and the demise of Enron, I can still remember schools that announced, well, that wouldn't have been our graduates because we have an ethics class at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, probably just before happy hour. But I mean, even that sort of philosophy on leadership, the MBA as a general management program, and leadership, you know, is sometimes almost seen as a buzzword and what it might represent. So how do you then practically achieve or develop that sort of leadership mindset and skill sets within the program?
You know, when I knew I was going to meet you, I thought, I know this is going to be about responsible leadership, but I actually had no idea of the origins of the word leadership. And it comes from apparently an old English word, which I'm not going to try and pronounce, but it has its history in this notion of a journey. And so for us, what we've had to do at RSM is to design a learning journey that will significantly alter a life journey. And that means, once again, that we can't say, well, of course we teach leadership, it's in course, you know, maybe not quite before happy hour on the Friday. But this question around having a philosophy of how students learn, and I'm a great believer in about learning rather than teaching. So one can go and look at a curriculum. But for us, this question of being able to study phenomena of leadership, case studies, where have we gone wrong, what are contemporary debates, has to be augmented by the opportunity for deep reflection, both individually and in groups. And we rely quite heavily in the program on coaching to do that, but also on an inquiry-based mindset that calls for a lot of questioning. The other piece that I think is really important is the opportunity to not just study past case studies, but to actually go into lived opportunities. And so for us in the MBA, there are a couple of interventions, two of them that I'd like to mention that I think are really important is one is called the Living Management Project, and that's about solving a managerial dilemma, working with the company. And obviously there are ethical and responsibility considerations embedded in that. The other is a project that is specifically dedicated, and our students are actually in that at the moment, called TIME, which is short for the Impact Project. And that's about combining innovation, design thinking, but also a real knowledge of how we can shift the needle on businesses' contribution to responsible behavior, where students actually have to go and work on developing prototypes. And each year we take a different theme. The theme, for example, for this year is around sustainable cities. And we're using Rotterdam as that. So we're actually not just asking students to think about it. We're not just asking them to believe in it. And there's a lot of conversation around things like developing I will statements. That's about the heart, but actually to put pen to paper in an old-fashioned word and work in a group to problem solve, to come out with something that will hopefully lead to a better world.
Right. Thank you for the homework that you did to sort of reposition that sense of a journey, because I think so often, the MBA experience, naturally people are interested in outcomes and the results of this investment, but it is a wonderful, wonderful journey. Your graduates, they will have tremendous opportunities across so many industries, but I think to be reminded of the journey, that personal learning and leadership journey that you'll go on. Now, in your personal journey, research that you looked at a few years back was around areas of ethical sales and marketing. And you made me smile describing that as an oxymoron. Ethics and leadership, is that a toxic combination, or is it really the two go hand in hand?
No, they're absolutely essential. There's this question of course, what is leadership, and the link back to the journey. You cannot guide others if you don't have the skills yourself. So this question of how to move forward, how to journey, but that has to be accompanied with to what end, why. The why are we actually doing that? So to me, if we're not tying in leadership and this thinking about the journey with the end and the why, and what is it that you're trying to achieve in that journey, we've totally failed. And I mean, I'd like to go a step back, Matt, to what you've just said about the journey. What I've seen about a full-time MBA is it's a deep opportunity to work on identity. If students don't leave an MBA with a deep sense of who am I, what is it that I want to shift, that goes way beyond what is the next job that I'm going to apply, I would argue that we failed. Because if we're not, you only get one shot at an MBA. This is not a degree that you can come back. I'd love to actually, but you can't come back and do them every 10 years. So if we don't set up our students, not for the next career step, and for many of them, they're using it to pivot, but to actually reflect very deeply on what really matters to me, what will my contribution be, what kind of leader am I going to be across the decades? And if we're not giving them the skills to re-ask that question, to learn, to unlearn, to relearn as they go, and to have the courage to make those right choices, we failed.
Right, right. And as you say, it's a constant evolving process. Now, Rotterdam, as one of Europe's most dynamic and interesting cities, and this sense of then how, whether with leadership or just operating in business in very multicultural senses. So cross-cultural communication has become a very important component for leadership. How does RSM approach that and develop those sort of skills to help students in the very international careers that they're likely to follow?
It's a great question. And again, it's something that I'm incredibly enthused by in terms of particularly our full-time MBA class. Because I think there are multiple ways that one can grow this dimension of cross-cultural awareness. And probably the most profound is when you have to work together with people who come from very diverse groups, but in an environment that fosters and cherishes a sense of inclusion. Because it's one thing to say, we've got students from just short of 50 countries in the program, which we have, and we have a very strong record for doing that. But that on its own doesn't automatically mean that you're going to learn those cross-cultural skills. If you have a dominant way of doing things and dominant voices that is rooted in a single culture, I think that negates some of the benefit. So for me, one of the privileges of working at the Rotterdam School of Management is that I'm surrounded by colleagues from multiple different cultures, people who come into the classroom who are going to be held accountable for the learning, and the amazing support staff that we have who also make that difference. I think having that in the program gives a richness and gives the opportunity for more voice. I think there are, and obviously they've been hampered by COVID, the opportunities to travel and really sense make. So one of the changes that for me is absolutely critical is a shift away in business schools from saying to students, well, you're going to learn cross-cultural skills because we're going to put you on a plane. And in some cases, what's happened is students have flown on a plane, they've landed in a business school in another city, they have dived into a classroom, they've spent 5 days in the classroom, they've maybe gone and done some partying and they've gone home. That's not a cross-cultural immersion. And so one has to approach this from multiple perspectives. I think the other thing that having diverse faculty brings is to be able to also include thinking from different cultural perspectives. So as for example, as a South African, I've had the deep benefit of having lots of conversations about African models of management. Now, there are some things that Africa gets wrong, but there's also been some deep philosophical thinking that has come out of the African continent that may be different to a European business model or a US focused business model. So I think it goes to what's in your curriculum, who's in the room, what norms you have around voice and being able to learn to not only speak, but to listen to the other, and the safety of an environment to deconstruct that. All of those things come together then to really create a cauldron or a furnace that ultimately, I think when people leave, I know when people leave our MBA, they've had an experience set like they've never experienced.
Just in that answer, in some ways you've preempted my next question. You've talked about the acknowledgement of others, the role that they play in any individual's leadership journey, the importance of listening. If you were to sort of distill it down, and this isn't intended to be to sort of limit the question, but 3 key leadership skills that you feel that Rotterdam MBA students, business school students need to be successful in business?
I'm gonna personalize it because I can't even say it's RSM students. I think the most critical skill for me is the ability to learn. And that in itself has a whole lot of subsets of skills. It's an openness, it's a curiosity, it's the ability to also confront your own biases and decide where you're going to unlearn. And that's the hard thing for all of us as adult learners. We're not a tabula rasa. We come with our own biases. We come with our own, what we see as truths. So for me, really successful leaders are able to learn and unlearn. I think there's a second piece that has to do with a profound respect and interest and support for humanity. So this question of other people, it's not just about being curious here. It's actually, it ties in with skills like empathy. It ultimately, we are journeying with people for people. And if you have no interest in people, then leadership is not your thing. So, you know, for me, probably those two tying in with that is obviously communication skills. And then I am going to mention the third, which for me is critical, is this question of a moral compass. So I think if you can bring those three, if that learning and some of that is about critique, etc., this question of people and a moral compass, you've got a lot of the right skill set to become an incredibly effective leader.
How fortunate we are, Nicola, to have you with us at the Centre Court Festival. I mean, just your own clarity of communication, but to be able to sort of capture and share those ideas, I think for our viewers from all over the world, it will resonate deeply with them. Now, you've had the opportunity to see individuals as they come into the program and, you know, their particular journey. Examples of that sort of growth and development. Do you have a student in mind that you think captures some of what you've been describing?
So Matt, it's hard to take one specifically. And interestingly, we had this discussion the other day that sometimes the alumni that go on to really make their mark, are those always, is a successful alumnus always an alumnus that we're truly proud of? Because sometimes you can have a situation where an alumnus goes on to make extraordinary large amounts of money, is a deep success in the business world. But for me, the alumni that I really resonate with are the ones who can come out from an MBA journey and actually go, I'm ready to take up this mantle. I'm ready to be agentic. I'm ready to shift. And I would love to say that that's the case with all of our alumni. I think the proof point is difficult. We had one alumnus who was a student called Leon Loebscher, and I'm not choosing him because he's a South African and I'm a South African. But this alumnus he's an alumnus of our class of 2020. He chose to write a letter. And to me, the letter was about taking up the responsibility. He talks about the role of steering as leadership and the hand on the wheel. And the responsibility that he feels and the obligation and the energy to actually go out and build a better world. And I love this clip. It was before I joined RSM, and had the opportunity to get to know Leon really well. But we've actually produced a clip on it where he shares his letter. And I think it's these stories about personal change and a shift in intent. That's what makes me really proud when it comes to our alumni.
You've talked about learning and, as importantly, unlearning to then take those next steps. It used to be considered perhaps that, you know, leadership was something that you had or that you hadn't, and whether it emerged on the playground or in the boardroom. But as you think about, of course, the structure and the very careful thought that has gone into the curriculum of the MBA program and the sort of can't think of the word, the sort of boots on the ground learning that's also and hand in hand with that experience. You talk about empathy, these different skill sets. What are things that people can do to enhance that sort of leadership IQ and those capabilities?
I think there are formal interventions that one can go into. So, you know, for example, we've seen the benefits of coaching on our program. But I think this formal discipline around reflexivity is a really big thing for me. So this question of actually making a date with yourself on a fairly regular basis to take some time out to go, how am I doing? You've got to do that in two ways. The one aspect is really to look at yourself, and that's the harder one sometimes. Look at yourself in the mirror and go, how am I doing? What am I prepared to acknowledge hasn't been ideal? What do I learn from it? How do I let it go in certain cases? I think that's also got to be augmented by brave questions to ask from other people that says, how am I doing? And what am I bringing to the party and what am I not? We've all got biases. I grew up in an environment, not so much my family environment, but I grew up in an environment where it certainly wasn't focused on strengths. It was a deficit model. What am I getting wrong? And let me work on my weaknesses. I think a good leader has a good sense of what they bring to the party and what their strengths are. They also have a sense of what I like the term allowable weaknesses, because we all have things we're not great at. But we've got to know that, because that means that we can then partner and form teams with people who do bring that to the party. Right. But you can't keep on developing as a leader if you don't take the time to ask these questions. And so this notion that I was forged in the crucible of an MBA might make you leadership ready for a period, but it's like staying fit. If you're not constantly working on this, it's not going to work. And then what happens is leaders burn out. They lose their own sense of the flame that keeps them going, of a sense of purpose, of a realistic outcome of where they're at. So my advice would be, make a date with yourself and make it regularly. It might be weekly. For some people, they have the discipline to make it daily. It might be one afternoon a month that just says, I'm going to think about myself, my journey, my impact. I'm going to look at where I've got it right. I'm going to look at where I've got it wrong. And I'm going to move forward in that way.
With your colleague, Brandon Kirby, of course, we'll be talking about admissions and a mirror, I think, that business schools hold up at this early stage of an individual's career, to think about next steps, the path of personal and professional development that they're looking for, maybe even aspiring to particular future leadership roles. So what advice would you have for that applicant to business school, thinking about the journey that lies ahead?
Bring your whole self. Bring your whole self into that journey. This is not an MBA is not a mental exercise, and business life and succeeding in leadership is not a mental exercise. It works when people can yes, bring the intellect, and this is the thing that obviously universities are often most known for, is the quality of the thinking. But people don't hire a brain; they hire a whole person. And just as when we look for applicants, we don't just look at their intellectual quotient. Of course, we want somebody who's going to succeed with the intellectual rigor of the program. But this question of who is this whole person, and are they up to coming in and some profound reshaping that nobody's going to do for them. They're going to have to do all for themselves. And ultimately, the people that do well in MBAs go on, I think, to do well in life because they're open to that kind of change. One thing that I learned some years ago, we worked on a research project in my former school, and it was around what makes somebody successful in an MBA, and we need to replicate it here. But one of the things that we found was really strong was a self-awareness and an intentionality. I'm doing this MBA because. Now, I think one of the weak reasons to do it is because I need to get a different job. I really encourage applicants to think about this investment in themselves, their own identity, and being open to those kind of changes. We also don't always know where we're headed when we go into the MBA. We had an argument the other day. Well, it wasn't an argument, but a discussion around this formation of ethical character. Should we take an applicant who is unsure about certain ethical issues? And for me, there's a space to really learn and fine tune this. Some of our students coming in will not be as attuned to responsible leadership, but if they're not open to changing themselves, we can't live our mission. We can't try and promote being this force for positive change if somebody's coming in and they really have no sense of or appetite for change.
Right. You've brought us full circle. We started by describing that mission statement of RSM as a force for positive change. You are a wonderful embodiment, I think, of that at the school. And I think if the last 20 minutes is in any way representative of the sort of experience that MBA students can look forward to at RSM, I'm on board. Nicola, thank you. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And no doubt with Brandon, you'll have that next generation asking themselves these same questions. But thank you for your thoughtfulness and your time.
We're excited to welcome them, and thank you, Matt. It's been lovely chatting.